In this beginner's tutorial, we're going to cover the fundamentals of getting started with FreeCAD, which is a free and open source parametric CAD modeling software. Now, this tutorial is going to take a slightly different approach from most FreeCAD beginner content that you're going to find online. So in my experience, many introductory tutorials move far too quickly into complex territory, assuming that viewers already understand concepts like construction geometry, sketch planes, and history-based modeling. So when beginners then try to model on their own, they're immediately confronted with a wall of error messages, and that's usually where most people give up. So in this tutorial, I'm going to start from the absolute basics and deliberately avoid the operations that most commonly trigger those errors. So whether you've never touched CAD software before or you're coming from a mesh-based modeling tool like Blender, this series is designed to give you a smooth and frustration-free entry point into FreeCAD. Now, FreeCAD requires a fundamentally different mindset from traditional 3D modeling software. The biggest shift, especially if you're coming from a mesh or surface modeling background, is that FreeCAD is a parametric modeling tool. So your workflow is primarily built around 2D geometry. You sketch shapes, you apply constraints to fully define them, and then you use those constrained sketches to generate 3D geometry through operations like extrusions or revolutions. This means that you need to train yourself to look at any 3D object and then mentally understand it in terms of its core 2D profiles. Now, in my opinion, it's a genuinely satisfying and interesting way to approach design once it clicks, but it does take some time before this becomes second nature. Now, in this tutorial series, we'll work towards building something like this moon lander here, but before we touch any 3D tools, we'll start by identifying the 2D shapes that define it. So to make this easier, I've created a page on Light where you can download both the 3D render and its corresponding flattened 2D geometry. This is, of course, completely optional. You can follow along in this series without these reference images, but having a reference image is really helpful when you're trying to train yourself to see 3D objects as 2D profiles. I'll drop a link in the description below to this free resource. For now, just save it to your computer, and in a few moments, I'm going to teach you how to add the image as a reference image within FreeCAD. Also, for those of you who are curious, Light can take any product image that you've created on the platform and then flatten it into 2D geometry using this CAD sketch tool here. You can then import that geometry into FreeCAD as a tracing reference, just as we've done here. Now, this is a really handy workflow if you're trying to design your own custom parts or products. And again, if that sounds useful, there's also a link to Light in the description below. Okay, so let's get started. So I'll assume you already have FreeCAD installed and open on your computer. Now, one of the first things that throws beginners off and one of the most common complaints about FreeCAD is the UI. Now, out of the box, the interface can feel overwhelming pretty quickly. So let's fix that before anything else. So first, let's go to Tools, and then we'll click on this add-on manager option here. Now, you may see a warning dialog about using third-party add-ons. Just read through it and then continue. And then once this pop-up loads here, you'll be brought to a screen that looks something like this. Now, from here, search for OpenTheme and then select the result shown here. What we'll do next is we'll click on Install, and then we'll apply any pending changes. Now, with this theme installed, go over to Edit and then click on Preferences down here. And then click on this General tab under the main General Settings section. From here, you can select either Open Dark or Open Light. I'll go with Open Dark here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Apply. Now we can start organizing the interface to our liking. So for example, you may notice the workbench toolbar sitting here in this menu row. So let's move it down to its own row to free up some space here. Now each toolbar block has a small drag handle that lets you reposition it wherever you'd like. You can also rearrange your other toolbars here while you're at it. So notice that each block is resizable. You can expand or contract it to show as many or as few icons as you want. And if there isn't enough room to display all of the icons in a block, a small drop-down arrow will appear right here, letting you access any hidden icons. And if you're ever unsure what an icon does, just hover over it and it will show you the functionality of this icon through a tooltip. Throughout this tutorial series, we're going to be working almost exclusively in part design. Now, as mentioned, workbenches are an enormously powerful feature of FreeCAD. In my opinion, these workbenches are one of the things that truly sets FreeCAD apart from other CAD software out there. So think of workbenches as specialized work environments. Each one is designed for a specific type of task. The TechDraw workbench, for example, lets you generate technical drawings directly from your 3D models. FreeCAD ships with a huge set of built-in workbenches, but you can also extend it further through this add-ons tab here. A great example is the fasteners workbench, which lets you add industry standard hardware, so things like nuts and bolts and screws and so on, complete with standardized sizes and thread specifications. Again, this is of course beyond the scope of this introductory tutorial, but I think it's worth knowing that this capability is there as you grow into the software. Now you can reposition this toolbar however you like. You can move it back up to the top row if you want, or you can even dock it vertically along the left side here to free up space at the top of the screen. So make sure part design is selected here by default, either as the active tab or as the selected drop-down value. Now for the left sidebar, you can select the toggle overlay icon right here to make this sidebar transparent if you prefer. Now, while we're here, let's also make sure that we're starting from the same place. So if your sidebar is completely empty, you can create a new file by clicking the icon shown right here. Now, if you already have a body or other objects in your sidebar, go ahead and delete them now by right-clicking and selecting delete. Now that the interface is looking much better, let's set up our mouse navigation. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do this. So the first is by clicking first on edit, and then we'll select preferences, and then we'll select this display option here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on this navigation subtab. Now you'll see a drop down here that lets you set your 3D navigation style. Now I'm going to select Blender from the list here, but you can select anything that you're familiar with. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click apply and close. However, there's actually a quicker way to do this. So in the bottom right corner of the screen over in our main interface, you'll find a drop down with the same navigation options. Now mine's already set to Blender, but you could change this anytime right from here. Now, what I really like about this second approach is that after making your selection, you can hover over the dropdown and it will display a visual overview of your navigation controls, which is a handy reference when you're still just getting comfortable with FreeCAD. Now, without an object on the canvas, the navigation controls are a little hard to see. So let's just add the hello world of CAD and place a 3D cube on the canvas. So with part design selected, hover over the cube icon labeled additive primitive and select additive box. Your screen should now look something like this with the coordinate system and a cube outline visible on the canvas. Now you can toggle the visibility of any element on or off in the sidebar by clicking on this visibility icon, or you can select the item that you want to turn the visibility on or off for, and you can just press your spacebar. Now, for now, don't worry about any of these settings over here. We're going to cover all of these things soon. Just click on OK to continue. Now, with the cube added to our workspace, let's take a moment to experiment with moving around it. So here's a quick overview of the basic navigation controls. So to orbit, hold the middle mouse button and then just drag yourself around the object. To pan, you can hold Shift plus the middle mouse button and again, just drag yourself around the object. Or what you can do is you can hold both right and left mouse buttons at the same time, and again, you can pan. Or what you could do is you could use your scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in or out. And of course, to select any part of your object here, all you need to do is left click on any part of your geometry. Also notice the navigation cube in the corner here, which rotates in sync as you move around your object. Now, if you ever get disoriented or lost, you have a few options. So first of all, you can always click on this fit all icon right here to reset the view and bring everything back into frame. You could also click on any face of the navigation cube to snap your view to that side. You can also use these arrows around the cube to correct your orientation if you ever end up upside down or sideways. You can also press the number keys on your keyboard to jump to a preset view. So for example, 1 represents front, 2 for top, 3 for right, and so on. You can also click on this icon to toggle between orthographic and perspective modes. Now we're just going to keep it set to orthographic for now. Another useful option is draw style, which allows you to control how your geometry is displayed. So a few things worth knowing here. First of all, we have wireframe, which shows only the edges of the object with no fills. Shaded removes the edge lines and shows the object with shading applied. No shading displays the object flat without any shading. And as is the default view, which I'm just going to go ahead and revert back to now. And whenever you're ready to save your file, all you need to do is just go up here to File and then click on Save As. You can also export your file in a variety of formats for use in other CAD software tools, or even in other programs like Blender, for example. So for example, you can export as an OBJ file, a GLB file, or an STL file. And if you're planning on 3D printing, the 3MF format is worth knowing about as well. It's broadly compatible with most modern 3D printers and is generally the recommended format for printing. Now in FreeCAD, we're more often than not starting from 2D geometry. So rather than working with a primitive like a cube, like we just added, a more realistic starting point is either a 2D reference image, like the one we added earlier to trace from, or a technical sketch with accurate dimensions. Now we'll be taking the first approach here. So there are two ways to get to your 2D geometry. Now, if you'd like a free ready-made file to follow along with, just grab it using the resource link in the description. If you'd prefer to create your own, head over to Light Loop and use this CAD sketch tool. All you need to do is upload an image of what you're trying to model, choose your preferred angle, and then Light Loop will flatten that geometry for you. There are also some really interesting style options beyond the basic black and white options here. I have a full tutorial on this CAD sketch tool, so I'm going to link to that in the description below as well. So once you have your image ready, what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into FreeCAD. Then what we're going to do is we're going to hide this 3D geometry, this geometry here that we added earlier. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Open, and we're going to select the 2D reference image that we just downloaded. Then what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the imported image in order to bring up this settings panel right here. Now from here, what we can do is we can align it to the appropriate plane. And in our case, that plane is the XZ plane, which will align the image to the front view. You can then click on 1 on your keyboard to change to the front view, or click on View and then look under Standard Views and then select Front. Now we're not going to do this now, but notice that we can also rescale this image to our desired dimensions. We can also do things like adjust its transparency. But for now, we're just going to leave it. We're going to click OK once we're done. Now this brings me to an important point about organization. So right now this project is really simple and it's really easy to manage, of course. But once we start adding more elements, the model tree here can get cluttered quite quickly. So it's worth building good habits early here. Now the first thing that you can do is you can rename your element. So right click on any item in the model tree here and then just select rename. Or what you can do even quicker is just simply select F2 on your keyboard. So for example, I'm going to rename this to cube. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this element here to sketch reference. And this way their purpose is immediately clear to me. You can also create folders in the model tree to group related elements together. So for example, you could click on this folder icon here and then just give your folder a name. For instance, I'm going to create a folder called reference images, and I'm just going to keep all of my tracing references as separate items within this folder from my working geometry. Again, this is a small habit, but it makes a big difference as your project grows in size. Okay, so let's deactivate the reference image now, and let's reactivate the cube. Now, by default, this is how the environment, lighting, and background look in FreeCAD. Now, to adjust them, go to Edit, then Preferences, then click on Display, and then what you'll do is you'll click on this light source option here. Now you can add or remove lights. So for example, I'll deactivate my main light, which as you can see has a pretty dramatic effect. Now rather than turning it off entirely, you could also just dial down its intensity, adjust its vertical angle, or change its color. Any changes that you make here can be previewed in real time at the bottom of this panel. Now to change the background, simply click on this color subtab under the display heading right here. And then from here, you can choose between a flat color or a gradient and then select whatever colors you'd like. So I'm just going to set my colors to this, and then I'm going to apply my changes. Now, it's also possible to change the material type and color of your model as a whole or for individual parts. Now, I'm going to go into more detail on this in future tutorials, but for now, I just want you to know this capability exists, so let's just do something simple. So there are a couple of different ways to access materials and colors in FreeCAD. Now, the quickest is just to right-click your object and then select either material or appearance from the context menu here. But there's another approach worth knowing about. With your object selected, click the View tab in the Model panel right here, and then look for Shape Appearance under the Object Style section. Click it, and then select the color from the color picker that appears. Now, you can select a color from this color picker here, and then what you can do is you can click on OK, and then go back to your main preview window here and just deselect the object, and you're going to see the object with the new color applied. So we still have a lot more to cover, but I'm intentionally breaking this down into logical, digestible chunks. And this one was dedicated entirely to getting comfortable with the workspace. Things like 3D navigation, interface setup, lighting, color, and adding a simple primitive. And again, if you'd like to follow along with either the demo images that I've been using so far or your own custom product ideas rather than the Moonlander idea that I'm working with here, be sure to head over to Lightloop to learn more about our 2D sketch and product ideation tools for designers and engineers. Again, a link can be found in the description below. And if you found this tutorial helpful, a like and subscribe is greatly appreciated and goes a long way in keeping the channel going. A link to the next tutorial in this series can also be found below. Okay, I'll see you over in the next one.